Hi, I'm Jessica Rector, your host and founder of This Man Thing, where we help men think bigger, be bigger, and play bigger. We want you to gain more freedom, more confidence, and more success. You can find out more about us at thismanthing.com. You can also join our free Facebook group, and you can search for us at This Man Thing, or you can go to thismanthing.com/groups. And we are having real conversation in that group and building much needed community support and camaraderie with other men. I want to introduce you to our guest today, Naris Nasseri. He's an LA-based independent filmmaker and photographer, and he is a film and video producer for The Mighty, an online website advocating for people with mental illnesses, disabilities, and diseases. He is an avid lover of coffee and dogs. Please help me welcome Naris. Hi, Naris. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Jessica.
Pleasure. So tell us a little bit about you. How did you get into making films, and why did you pick the topic of mental illnesses, disabilities, and diseases? That's so powerful.
Sure. So I started doing theater when I was a teenager. And that started becoming a passion of mine. It slowly segued into making like student films in college when I got to UCLA and things like that. And then that sort of segued to a job at Walt Disney Imagineering for about a year. And that was really fun. And I unfortunately cannot say anything about it, even though it was really, really cool. But there was a certain part of me that was like, well, I feel like I should be using my love for film to help people somehow. So I felt creatively unfulfilled. And I had like an existential crisis that every 23-year-old guy goes through, I'm sure. And
what kind of crisis is that?
It's just kind of like, what is my purpose on the planet? I'm a frequently very deep self-analytical thinker. So it was just kind of like, how do I combine a love for helping people, but then also a creative field, but then also, not live in my mom's basement for the rest of my life and pay my own rent. And that was when I got a call from this place called The Mighty, and they said, we're looking for a new film and video guy to basically help us make short informational and documentaries and videos for, mental health and chronic illness advocacy and things like that. And I said, that's perfect. And I almost was ready to like quit my job and go work for them. So after 3 or 4 interviews, they finally decided to bring me on. And I've been here. Yesterday was actually my 6-month anniversary with the company. So yeah, which I know to a lot of people is actually very short, but yeah, so it's been a really very intense 6 months. I've worked with people with every type of illness, people who have attempted suicide, people who have Down syndrome, but I've also worked with like huge celebrities like Mayim Bialik from The Big Bang Theory and Blossom, and Wentworth Miller from Prison Break. Everyone kind of just like coming together to work in mental health advocacy, but also disability advocacy. And everything. So that's kind of, I guess, me in a nutshell, and what I do. Yeah.
And so when you started working for The Mighty, or before you started working for The Mighty, were you passionate about those topics, or started working for them helped you become passionate about them?
I wasn't specifically passionate about those topics because I didn't know that that was sort of something you could do. I didn't know that. Just because when you work at like Disney and stuff like that, I didn't know that there was a thing called mental health advocacy. I didn't know that there was a thing called disability advocacy, which kind of like sucks now because I didn't think that those people like needed advocating for until like you start to like work in that field and be like, oh no, there are like several problems going on here. Like this is a thing that needs to be addressed. So that was kind of what sparked my passion for it.
So tell us about some of the problems going on with those topics, those issues.
I think there's a lot. My job specifically entails kind of like interviewing a lot of people for like Facebook Live videos, kind of like a podcast. There's one of the biggest things. It's funny. I just made a list yesterday about like what I've learned making 100 live videos with the Mighty. So I'll pull it up and make it authentic. But basically, one of the biggest problems is that a lot of the times people who might be in a wheelchair or people who might have some kind of mental disorder are like labeled and stigmatized and put like in a category that is like not one of us.
Right.
I think on the flip side, they are very much one of us. They're a person just like everybody else. And I hate that that's something that like even needs to be said in a way, but the way that society's kind of built, it does need to be said. I think that this is one of the very few times that I will ever say we actually need more men to speak up about mental illnesses and things like that. And I say that with a lot of caution, because when I worked at Disney and, you know, and film production and stuff like that, there's very much a thing of women are underrepresented. And it's an interesting dilemma where I'm working in a field where I'm always kind of like, I'm personally always like, let's get more women on screen and let's get more women in front of the camera and stuff like that. But this is one of the very few times where I'm actually like, oh, I need to get more men to talk about mental illnesses.
And why is that, Naris?
Because if you look at like, not to get like started. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Say that again.
No, I said, so why is that, Naris? About getting men on screen.
I don't exactly know. Statistics are kind of like telling a sad story, in that if you look at the number of suicides that have happened like in the UK and in the US, men are 79% of those. Like that's a huge fraction of all suicides. When you've got like, when it's 79% out of 100%, like there's two genders and men are 79 of 100 suicides. I think that's a very telling statistic that a lot of people don't realize, because half of all male depressions go completely unknown and untreated. And so few men talk about mental illness for whatever reason. I'll kind of liken it to machismo culture and call it a day, and say we got to do something about that. But yeah, I think, sorry, there's an ambulance passing. But yeah, that's kind of like my big statistic that I've been kind of like grappling with for the past few months working here, of like, how do we address this, and how do we kind of say like, okay guys, let's really drop that like this man thing, this man, you know, whether you call it an ego or like a manly testosterone, whatever it is, like let's kind of just have a conversation about it.
And that's why this man thing got started, was because you know, my brother, very, very, very successful, committed suicide. And
oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, thanks. And when that happened, it shook us, it shocked us, it came from left field. And after, you know, the sadness and the shock and everything subsided, I started looking at and researching all of the numbers and the statistics and, you know, what's happening to men in our society. And suicide is actually the number one cause of death in the UK for men. And it's number two over here in the States for men. And it's actually number two for males 10 to 50. And so it's like, when you look at that statistic, you hear about age, you hear about homicide, you hear about all these other things more than you hear about suicide, but yet suicide's killing more men a year. And I was like, there's something has got to be done about that. Like, what's at the core? What's causing this? And my belief is, and what I work with men on is that it's not sadness that's causing suicide. Shame's causing suicide, because if they could embrace and love themselves, all of themselves, flaws, failures, imperfection, mistakes, and all, and they didn't have the shame attached to whatever it is, then suicide would ideally cease to exist, or it would absolutely decrease. And so for me, it's about let's help these men get to the core of the issue if they're in that state of mind, and figure out what is causing them down this road. But more importantly, let's reach men, or just as important, let's reach men before it even gets to that point. Let's help them, whatever it looks like, help them before it ever gets to that point. And how can we do that? Yeah. And that's why I started this man thing, because I thought, well, if my brother had a safe place where he could share with other men who get it, right? That he build, where he has this community, this support system, that at the end of the day, he knows he's still gonna be loved and accepted and appreciated. And so men, I think, lack that, and they lack the, I don't want to say confidence, but the way they grew up was not in a way of, let's talk about our emotions, let's express what's going on. It's, hey, let's talk about the weather. Hey, what happened with your favorite sports team last week? So they're not having conversations around issues that are really affecting their life. And when you grow up that way from a boy and you're taught that, guess what happens when you become a man? That's all you know, because you've been living that way for 20, 30, 40 years. And then when, you know, the bigger issues come up consistently, you don't know how to deal with them. You don't know how to process them. You don't know how to express them. So you just numb yourselves and you push them down, and numbing yourself, whether it's addiction, whether, you know, you become a workaholic, drug, you know, all these different ways that men are numbing themselves and being and expressing their emotions in an unproductive and healthy way. So it's really, you know, what you're talking about is really close to my heart. And, but I also believe that we can help men before it ever gets to that point. And, you know, with this man thing, we help men at various stages, but I think it's so vital that we go, you know, it doesn't have to reach that stage before we can help men, before, you know, men can express themselves, before they can join, you know, other men's groups or men's communities or whatnot. That it can happen at any stage along the way, and know that they're loved and supported and appreciated. And I think part of that has to do with them trying to live up to some expectation of what it takes to be a man. And, you know, and not just saying, hey, I'm a man, just who I am, as I am. And so I want to kind of delve into that with you of, you know, what it takes to be a man, what does society think it needs to be a man, and how can we redefine masculinity to help men embrace all of themselves, whether, no matter where they are in the spectrum of, quote unquote, what it takes to be a man, right? So I'd love your thoughts on that and how we redefine masculinity.
Yeah, well, that's an extremely loaded question that a 23-year-old boy will never fully answer. And also, thank you for sharing that about, you know, your brother. My heart absolutely goes out to you. I would say one of the biggest first steps that, you know, we kind of take in the mental health community is readjusting our linguistics just a little bit, like changing the way we say things. Instead of saying a depressed person, we say a person who has depression. Instead of saying commit suicide, we actually are trying to get rid of that phrase. We're trying to call it die by suicide, because commit makes it sound like they're committing a crime, and that kind of attaches a certain, even more shame to it. I think those are some big...
I got to interrupt for you just a minute. That is very, very powerful. I'm really big on language and how we use it, because we oftentimes don't know how it lands on the other person, right? We can intend one thing, and yet it lands completely different, and especially with tone of voice and all of that adding in. So I just want to take a minute and acknowledge how powerful just that is, and you saying that, if we just change a few of these things, because also, you know, just acknowledging that we say a depressed man, that gives them a label, right? And then a person identifies with a label, and I am of the mindset, like, those things don't define us, right? Mistakes don't define you, or roles, whether you're a mother or father or an employee, those don't define you. But yet those are the first things we go to to define ourselves. And so if a man has depression and someone says he's a depressed man, he's going to start labeling himself as a depressed man, which then makes it that much harder for him to get away from that label, to not identify himself as that, and to get away from the shame associated with that, because there's such a huge stigma in society, like you mentioned earlier, around mental illness or depression. And so then he attaches himself to that, and then he becomes that, right? He becomes, I'm depressed.
Exactly.
I'm a depressed man. So I just want to acknowledge that. So please continue that. I think that's extremely powerful, though.
Yeah. It's interesting what just like a few little words that you change can make a difference. I would say other ways, one of the biggest things I've also observed over time, and the people that I kind of interview for these live videos, is that there's a profound, everyone loves to kind of give their own advice without listening first. So I think always making sure that we're able to provide an environment for people to talk about, it's easy to like talk about, say like, let's talk about feelings, but then the minute someone starts talking about feelings, the person on the other side listening instantly like turns on, oh, well, here's 10 things that I want to say to this person, because I'm gonna like, just creating a community of listening first and then talking, I think is also really important, especially like it's hard for guys to talk about things. It's really hard. And then that like establishing a world where it's not a bad thing to see a therapist or a counselor is really, really, really important. I know so many people who have delayed going to therapy, and it kind of like led their depression to getting into really bad places. I think destigmatizing seeing a therapist is really important.
So how do we do that, Naris? How do we destigmatize that? Because just like you had mentioned earlier about depression and the stigma that goes along with depression and mental illness. So how do we destigmatize those things? Because if that's anything that's on my plate that I'd love to do, like, okay, but I think that it takes one, it starts with one, but it takes a lot of people to destigmatize that. So what can we do to do that?
I think the first thing, honestly, is, as cheesy as it sounds, is to just like listen when you tell someone to talk to me. Like if you tell your like husband / boyfriend / brother / family member to talk, and then they start to talk, like really, 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 really listen. And like with that listening, an acknowledgement of that reality. I think that's like number 2, like expressing empathy through an acknowledgement of someone's feelings and reality. A lot of the times, I was raised in both a Latino and a Middle Eastern culture on both sides of my family. So like mental health, we don't talk about it. Like it's literally, that person's sick, that person's crazy. Just not saying those things when someone tries to open up to you. I've seen people actively try and open up about something that they're going through mentally, and then the other person will say, well, just shut off those feelings, that's crazy talk. But it's like, sure, like it's not real, and it might be like a mental illness, but like that is the person's reality. So I think like listening and acknowledging that that's the person's reality, and then saying, okay, now let's take active steps and helping that and working with that through professional help, through getting some kind of therapist or counselor. So listening first, and then acknowledging someone's feelings, even if they're different from your own, and expressing that sort of like empathy. I think that's kind of like the first steps that we can take. And then like third is like something that I always kind of want to talk about. I always feel like dudes need to be more free to like do creative things. Like I had like a very strange like mental health experience in high school where I really wanted to do musicals, and I was kind of like, that whole like, so you're gay. It's like, no, like I'm very straight. Like I'm dating a beautiful nurse right now. Trust me. Like I'm completely in love with her and everything, but I just so happened to do musicals, and like musicals sort of became my personal anti-drug and like my way of just kind of expressing a lot of energy that I had and stuff like that. And it was something that was an outlet that I sort of needed for my own like emotional and mental well-being, just because it was something that sports could not get out. And for some people, again, like if sports is your outlet, that's awesome. Like, go for it. That's fantastic. But I think there's a lot of guys who like, there's just like this whole thing of like, well, maybe a guy wants to dance and he's labeled as, and you kind of make an assumption like, oh, I wonder if he's gay. Like, that's literally where our brains always go to when we think of a male dancer. So I think a few of those things, like listening and not like being quick to make assumptions, not being quick to like express your own opinion about things, even if it's different from your own. That's literally the point of a mental illness, is that yes, it is not always correct. And instead of just saying, well, you're crazy, it's saying, okay, I acknowledge that that's what's going on in your head right now. I still love you for it. Thank you for opening up to me. Let's find you. Let's get help for this.
Man, you said so much juice in that. My mind was reeling because I was like, oh my gosh, so many great things in that. I always tell people, so first of all, I think it's imperative that when people open up, that they open up in a safe place, right? Someone who's going to love and accept them. And I always tell people, it's not about the other person's reaction. You can't control how they're going to react. It's about you liberating yourself by sharing it. So whatever it happens to be, if it's a mental illness, if you're feeling depressed, if like any of these things, if it's just, shame that you've dealt with since you were 8 years old that you want to share with someone to liberate yourself, it's not about their reaction. It's about you liberating yourself. And as the receiver, if you're the recipient of it, always meet it with compassion and empathy. That's the biggest thing that you can do, not only for them, but for yourself. Because when you share something, you want someone else to meet you with compassion and empathy too, right? It may not be your reality, but it's their reality. It may not be your truth, but it's their truth. And so I think it's so powerful for us as the recipient to have compassion and empathy, but also to acknowledge how brave this person is for sharing whatever it is they're sharing. And it's not our place to judge them or to say, like you said, no, just put that back where it came from.
Exactly.
And there's no better way to put someone back in shame is to give them, say something like that to them, give them that as a reaction, put that back where it came from. You're going to just throw them back into shame. And guess what? Men will do exactly that, and they will not open up again. They will put those walls right back up, and they're like, fine, I tried. I opened up one time. It didn't work out the way I wanted it to, so I'm not doing it again. No.
Exactly.
I learned my lesson. It was hard enough to open up to begin with.
Exactly.
That's the reaction I got. Lesson learned, not doing it again. And then that's just where it spirals downhill from there, because they're not, what it would take for them to open up again would take more than that they're willing to go through sometimes. And then I think the third point you made is that there's so many things wrong with what you had said, like in respect to, men not being allowed, quote unquote, to be creative, or that if you are, that you must be gay. Like, I mean, first of all, then that means we're judging men for being creative. We're automatically throwing them into, okay, well then you must be gay, as though there's something wrong, quote unquote, with being gay.
Exactly.
Not accepting you if you are, like, but yet that is so true what you said, that is immediately what people think, when that should not even be in your mind at all. Like, who cares if you're gay, straight, in between,
exactly,
outside? Like, it doesn't matter. The thing is if you're a man and being creative is what fills you up, then you need to do that. And here's the thing, what I believe, that we're all creative. We're all creative, whether you're a man or a woman. The thing is do you listen to that creativity, or do you say, no, I need to go, do this, go to sports events because that's what's acceptable as a man? But yet there are men who, do woodworking, who fix plumbing, who work on cars. All of that is a sense of creativity too. If they rebuild, restore, or any kind of design, you're designing building like architecture, that's creative. You're designing. So I think every man has that design creativity aspect in them. It just depends on what outlet that they want to use it through. And whether you're acting or dancing and all of that, none of that matters. if that's what fills you up, that's what fills you up. I actually have a men's group here locally in Dallas-Fort Worth, and we met last night, and one of the guys was saying that he likes to go dancing, and he even like showed me like his latest dance moves. You know, he took for a little spin. But the thing is there are a few men, a few of my clients as well, who are really big into dancing, and so I love that it's becoming a lot more acceptable for them, but also that they're in tune with that side of them. So for men out there who are listening, that are like, oh, okay, well, maybe I want to try something like that. What do you think they should do if they're wanting to get into that creative side of themselves?
I would say without hesitation, just go for it. Like Google, like whatever your zip code is, and then like swing dance classes or whatever dance class it might be, or piano or painting or design or anything. And just literally just go to one class and try it. Like, what is the worst possible thing that could happen? Like, you'll see a dude in there. Well, the dude is also taking that class.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
So yeah. And yeah, I would say just literally, what could it hurt? Just go for it. Like,
that's awesome.
There's really nothing to it. And bring another dude, or bring your bae, like bring your girlfriend if you want to. Like, I guarantee you she's not gonna think it's weird. She might, and then she'll probably open up to you and think it's awesome. Otherwise, you should probably get rid of her. Anyway.
Yes. I was just, if she doesn't like it, then you should probably get rid of her anyway. I was thinking that same thing. Probably get rid of her. So how can we help redefine masculinity and what it means to quote unquote be a man? Because, you know, there are men out there that I've talked to who say, you know, you need to man up, or you need to go, real men go hunting and fishing. And every time I hear that, I cringe. I'm like, just because a man doesn't like to go hunt and fish doesn't make him any less of a man, just because his interests aren't in hunting and fishing. So how can we tweak that and help more men become accepting of different ways and different ideas of what it takes to be a man? Yeah, I think, again, it's an impossible question that I'll never solve, but I think the first few steps we can take is, again, it all kind of is going back full circle, adjusting your language just a little bit, not always saying man up, like not defining that as what it means to be a man. And then again, like listening, like acknowledging that it's different from your own reality. I think the number one thing that, and I always hate to like stereotype my gender, but I think the number one thing that men are the worst at is listening. And I think just starting there and eliminating man up from your vocabulary is important. I recognize that me even saying that like triggers something in a man's mind to then start expressing their opinions. And that first thing is like the first thing that we kind of like need to like, okay, let's buckle that thing in our head down and like start to listen a little bit more. I recognize that it's there, like you said, there is progress being made. I think there's still a very, very, very long way to go, because if nothing else, that statistic that we first talked about is ever prevailing. 79%. 79% is way, 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 way too much. And that, I think there's a very, very, very direct correlation. I totally agree. Yeah. And you know, what's interesting is here in the States, if you look at the industries with the highest suicide rate, they're also male dominated industries. I don't think that's a coincidence. Yeah. You know, it's like, okay, they're also industries that have the most stress and the most pressure, right? And all of that stuff is in direct correlation with each other. So tell us, if, you know, we talked about all these different things today. So what is, someone's listening and they say, okay, maybe I identify with mental illness, or maybe I want to redefine what masculinity means to me. What's one thing that they can do, or one action that they can take? Like, where do they start so they're not so overwhelmed?
Yeah. The professional answer I would give is going to something like ADAA.org, which is the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, and just starting punching in their zip code and like finding a local therapist, and you will find I'm all like, when I first did it, I was very surprised that I typed in my zip code and there were like 14 results within like a 5-mile radius of me.
Wow.
It's like, oh, okay. So just me knowing that there were like several in my area helped me to realize, okay, that's like one thing that's making me realize maybe this is not that crazy, quote unquote.
Yeah.
You know, maybe this isn't that, like, this is clearly an issue going on. Number 2 is, well, you said one thing. I guess it's my one thing.
Yeah, you can give me number 2. Give me number 2.
I think number 2 is just opening up, trying to find one person that you think you can open up to about it. Just starting that conversation, and prefacing it with, hey, this is not an easy thing for me to talk about, but could you kind of like hear a few things that I have to say to you, and just listen first and foremost. The L word, listen, like the key word here being listen. And then 3, like, if nothing else, like me here, I'm telling you, if you're listening to this, like, don't be afraid to try like taking up the piano or dance or something like that. Like, literally those things got me my girlfriend. So and she's pretty perfect for me. So if nothing else, like, I'm not that I'm like an example or whatever, but like I'm proof that like it is cool. And you can still get a girl if you have a creative job. From my understanding, like, girls like a guy who can play guitar. Like, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But just starting like to take 1 or 2 steps of like, if you think you might have a mental illness, try finding that therapist. If you think that there's something going on with you, like, don't be afraid to find an quote unquote unconventionally man outlet for that, because I really, really, really want the phrase unconventional manly outlet to like stop being even in existence.
Yeah. And, you know, and I think part of that is just for us as humans to accept ourselves and all of ourselves and embrace ourselves and stop caring so much about what other people think, because I think that's a downfall of us all, is that we care too much about what other people think and not care enough about what we think. Like, it doesn't matter that, you know, Joe Smith down the street doesn't think it's manly if you take piano lessons or go dancing, because that's what you want to do and that's what fills you up. So why is Joe Smith's, why is his opinion more important than your own? Why does what he think more important than how you feel? And so I think it's also for us to take a look at ourselves and say, well, why am I looking outward, externally, instead of looking internally at what I want and what I want to do? Because then we're able to embrace those things, right? We're able to take acting lessons. We're able to play the piano. We're able to do all of those things that may not typically be deemed as masculine, but and that's the part of it, right? Why aren't they masculine? If more men did them, then they would be. Right? I mean, it's that simple. So thank you so much for joining us today, Naris. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your time and listening. And
thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you. To find out more or connect with Naris, go to narisnasseri.com. That's Naris, Nerris, Nasseri, Nassiri.com. So if you want to connect with us, you can go to thismanthing.com, and you can also connect with me at jessica@thismanthing.com. You can also join our Facebook group. Go to thismanthing.com/groups, and we would love to have you there, where we're having real conversation. And I hope you see you next time, and have a wonderful, fabulous, amazing day. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Bye, Naris.
Thanks, Jessica. Bye.